You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 126. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kailey
and Josiane from Edgecom. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. We are so excited to have you here with us today on the Balanced Educator podcast. In today's episode, I am going to be doing a solo episode. So this is Kailey. Hey there. And I'm going to be talking about how I taught mindfulness and social emotional learning in my high school classroom this year. So I'm going to be walking you through how I started off the semester, how I did it throughout the year, how it changed throughout the semester, what my students' feedback was, and what I'm going to change or do differently next semester now that I have one semester of practice teaching this in high school under my belt. So growing and learning. I'm excited to share this with you today. But before we jump into the episode, first I'm going to share today's awesome sponsor, which is the Simply Organized Teacher. So Josiane recently took the Organize Your Classroom Papers course created by Kelly Jackson of the Simply Organized Teacher, and she really loved it. So we really wanted to share about this resource with you because we think that you could get some awesome value from it too. So if you remember Kelly, we had her on the show to talk about all things classroom organization in episode 70. If you haven't listened to that episode, you should definitely check it out. The goal of the Organize Your Classroom Papers course is to sift through, clean out, and organize all your papers so you can stop spending time trying to remember where you put that copy or having to get your class involved in looking for those materials that you misplaced. So you can get access to the course by heading to edgecom.com/TBE 126. So that's Edgecom, EDUCALME.com/TBE as in the Balanced Educator 126. And then click on the link to the Simply Organized Teachers course that we'll have on that page for you. So inside the course, you're going to learn how to organize filing cabinets and digital files and lesson plan materials. So basically any kind of paper material, you're going to learn practical ways to organize and systemize your papers. In less than 40 minutes, Kelly will teach you how to clean out, organize, and systemize the papers in your classroom so you can get rid of some of that clutter. So go check that out at edgecom.com/TBE 126. All right, now let's get into today's topic, which is all about how I taught social emotional learning and mindfulness in high school this year. So just a little backstory in case you don't know or you forgot my story, but I started off teaching high school science. That was the first job I ever got, and that was a term position. I loved it. It was my dream job. It was so great. But because it was a term position, the following year, I started teaching in middle school. So I taught grades 7 and 8 math and science. And it was once I started teaching in middle school that I started getting this realization that students needed to learn more than just academics in the classroom. That in order to be ready for the academics, for the science and math lessons that I was throwing at them, I needed to do something to help them manage their emotions. So that year I had lots of students or I was kind of maybe surprised actually by the amount of social and emotional intensity came into my classroom. So my students would come in from lunch and, there would be drama between their friends and they would be excited and they would have so much energy. And I needed to find a way to help them prepare their minds and bodies for learning. And that's when I really started playing with teaching mindfulness in the classroom. When I was teaching in high school, this was never something that was a problem for me. I never thought like, oh, my students aren't ready for learning. I kind of just assumed that when they came into my class, they were ready to get started, and I kind of would just jump into the material right away. As a high school teacher, oftentimes our mindset is, I have so much content to get through, I have to get through it. So really it was all about go, go, go. My students would come into class and it was like we would get started right away. And I would push them to get all the stuff done. And my big focus was really the academic side of things. So I'm really grateful that my journey brought me to teaching in middle school next, because it showed me a different side of my students. It showed me the more human side of them and reminded me that these aren't just little robots in seats in front of me. They actually are humans with a lot of emotions going on. And as they are in high school, they might be a lot better at hiding those emotions, but it doesn't mean they're not having those emotions. So that really opened my eyes and made me view my job as a teacher in a new and different way. So I taught grade 8 for a couple years, and that's where I started playing with teaching mindfulness in the classroom and kind of was developing my way of doing it. And when I discovered I tried lots of different methods and then got to the point that I sort of figured out the formula that worked for me. And that was teaching 5 minutes of mindfulness every day at the start of the day. So I did that in grade 8. I did that in grade 6. And then Josiane and I, since we had both been doing this in our classrooms, been playing with what format worked. That's when we started realizing we were onto something, and that Edgecom could be a solution for teachers in other classrooms and across the world, really, that wanted to support their students' social-emotional learning and help their brains and bodies get ready for learning, but without having to kind of be an expert in mindfulness to be able to teach it. So taught in grade 6, then took time off to focus fully on creating Edgecom Classroom, the Edgecom program, went into a lot of schools to do work with students, to work with teachers, to work with administrators, did a ton of professional development workshops for teachers and administrators, and then came full circle and got back into the classroom, back at the school that I originally started with, and back teaching in high school. So that's where I'm at now. This year in September was when I got back into the high school classroom. And so now I had the Edgecom Classroom program to be able to use in my classroom, and also the skills that I had developed to be able to actually teach mindfulness just myself in the classroom. So now that you kind of know my story, I've laid the foundation, I want to explain step by step exactly what I did this year. So the big thing for high school teachers when we're talking about social emotional learning and teaching mindfulness in the classroom, the problem or worry often is like, how am I going to find time for this? There's so much to do in a high school classroom, especially this year when, the year has been interrupted in many ways because of COVID. This year, I saw my students every second day. So on the day that they were in class with me, I was teaching with them in person, and then the following day, they would be learning from home. So I would assign them things to do independently for independent learning at home. So that could be videos to watch with lessons, or, exercises to practice, or things to work on at home. And then when they came back to school the next day, we'd keep working together in person. So that's the way that the year went for me. And I definitely had moments where I kept thinking, like my brain was constantly thinking, there's not enough time, there's not enough time, there's not enough time. So there was definitely a temptation from time to time where my brain kept trying to convince me that there wasn't enough time. And I had to remind myself that I make time for the things that are important. And so that was always where my brain was going this year, was there's not enough time. And then I would be like, no, wait. I make time for the things that are important. And social emotional learning is really important to me in the classroom. And so that was the number one priority for me. So here's how I started. first day of class, when I had my students in person with me, I had, kind of the get to know you type of class where I talked about what they'd be learning that year or in this semester, kind of what the format of class would be, icebreaker games, those kind of things. But how I actually started that first day was the first thing I did was I introduced myself, explained a little bit about myself. So I talked about kind of my history through what I was like as a student, what I was like when I first started my teaching career, and how I recognized as an adult that I really needed strategies to help me be well, that I needed to practice things to help me manage life and manage my emotions and reduce stress and reduce anxiety. And that in that exploration, I discovered mindfulness. And mindfulness was a practice that really helped me to feel a lot more balanced in my life, really helped me to improve my mental health. And that it was so important in my life that it became something that I wanted to share with my students. So after telling that story to them, so I was kind of just laying the foundation for them of what are my values as a teacher, what's important to me, and what I care about teaching my students. And I explained to them also that my view as a teacher is not only I love science and I'm so passionate about teaching science. It's so interesting to me, and that's why I love coming to school every day. But I also really care about these humans in front of me. I care about my students deeply, and I really want to set them up for success in their lives in general. And so it's very important for me to teach them skills that are going to help them do well in all aspects of their lives. And so I told them specifically that teaching strategies for mental health in my classroom is really important to me because I want to give them those skills that they can use now, anytime that they're feeling anxious or worried or stressed in the classroom, or, into their future, that they would actually have skills that they can use to manage those emotions in a healthy way. So I explained that to them. And then I told them that we're going to be doing a daily mindfulness practice to help them get their minds and bodies ready for learning at the start of each class. So the first 5 minutes of each class is going to be a time where they're going to get to kind of just be silent and listen to this calming guided practice so that they could have the chance to manage any emotions they might be feeling, maybe wake up if they're feeling a little bit tired, and learn skills like breathing strategies and thinking strategies to help them be ready for the day ahead. And that the goal with that practice is really just to support their well-being and give them the chance to be able to come to their school day as their best selves. So, that introduction to what the mindfulness practice was going to be in the class really just came from a place of explaining why it was important in my own life and then why it was important to share mindfulness and social emotional learning with them so that they would understand where I'm coming from. I decided not to do a big long lesson about what mindfulness is or how it supports their mind and body right at the beginning. Instead, I kind of layered that throughout the school year. I kind of didn't want to make a big deal of this practice at the beginning. I just said, first 5 minutes of every class, we're going to be doing a mindfulness practice. And I had also asked them if they'd ever heard of mindfulness and what that meant to them. And we had a very short discussion of what mindfulness meant. But I told them that mindfulness is an exercise to get their brain and body ready for calm and focused learning, and that it will help them to support their well-being. So I kept it really simple at the beginning. Now, the next thing I did with them in that first class is I wanted to talk a little bit with them about emotions that they wanted to feel in class versus emotions that they didn't want to feel in class. So one thing that I had learned from Mark Brackett's book, so Dr. Mark Brackett wrote a wonderful book called Permission to Feel. We've talked about it on the podcast before, and I highly recommend reading it. It is a wonderful read. But one thing that he talks a lot about is how most of us, our emotional vocabulary is actually quite low, and how studies show that the better we are at articulating what emotions we're feeling, we're actually better able to manage those emotions and process those emotions when we can explain what they are. So I thought that it would be kind of fun to show my students a list of a bunch of different emotions and then talk about which ones they wanted to feel and which ones that they didn't want to feel. So the way that I set this up was I created kind of like a get to know you survey that I used. I did it in Microsoft Forms. And in the survey, the first question was choose. So I had a big list and I said, select three of the top emotions you would like to feel when you're in class. And then I had this image with all the different emotion names, and all the emotions were divided on this image based on color. So there was like green for kind of like a calm sort of but heightened awareness emotions. Then there was like red for the emotions that are more like angry and intense. And then there was like, it was divided or layered in intensity. So I teach in French immersion. So to speak about emotions in their second language, which is in French, their emotion vocabulary is even more reduced in French than it is in their first language, which is in English. So I really wanted to have this visual of emotions and this emotion vocabulary for them, so they could also learn how to say these emotions in French, for most of them for the first time. So the way I just found this image on Google. So I would suggest, if you want to look this up, I think I just Googled emotions chart, and then you'll see a bunch of different things come up, and choose one that sort of makes sense for the age group that you teach. And I talked about the emotion sort of quadrants with them as they were completing the survey on their own from their spots on their own laptops. So they chose the three emotions they wanted to feel in class. And this was really interesting for me, because then I was able to look at these forms and see very clearly which emotions my students wanted to feel and which ones they didn't. So I talked about how, I wanted to get this information so that I could help them to feel the emotions they want to feel and help them to feel less of the emotions they didn't want to feel. So it was interesting, the top emotions in all of my classes that I teach that students wanted to feel was they wanted to feel joy, they wanted to feel confidence, and they wanted to feel acceptance. And for some reason, that one surprised me. Like, I wasn't expecting that to be the top thing. So that really showed me that, okay, I need to make sure that I'm creating a way to create community in this class, and that I'm really creating like a culture in my classroom where everyone is accepted, and that I'm really demonstrating and modeling acceptance of all different people and acceptance of all ideas, and that I'm creating a space for people to be able to talk and share in their own way and feel accepted. So that was really interesting to me. Now, I also asked them which emotions they don't want to feel, and the top ones there, the top winners of emotions they didn't want to feel, was boredom. So I told them I'd be committed to making sure that things don't get boring, and that I would be asking for their feedback to help me know how I can make things more fun. They didn't want to feel distracted. That was interesting. So that showed me that distraction for teenagers these days is a problem, and that they needed help to learn how to reduce distractions. So that told me that, phones there needs to be specific guidelines and rules in my class for how their cell phones are used and things like that. Another top thing that students didn't want to feel in class was anxiety. So that one didn't surprise me. And I told them that, in our daily mindfulness practices, they would really be learning concrete strategies that they can use to reduce feelings of anxiousness, and learn how to manage anxiety. And that anxiety isn't a bad thing. It is just a natural emotion. and we can learn strategies for managing those emotions. So that's how I started things off. And that was just interesting for me and a way to just create the culture where talking about emotions in class isn't weird or taboo, that we can talk about emotions in this class and that it's something that I care about. I care how they're feeling. So after that, then, I teach science. So we made our Edgecom or our mindfulness practice just a part of our daily routine. So what our routine looked like on a normal classroom day, for the first part of the semester, was that students would come into class, I would greet them as they arrive, then we would sit down at our spots, and I would list the expectations for our mindfulness practice. So it was very simple. They'd all be sitting at their spots, and then I would just say, okay, we're going to start our mindfulness practice. Get comfortable, remove all distractions, and put your phones on the corner of your desk. So that was one that I learned after the first day that we did our mindfulness practice. I had a couple kids, I realized I looked up and they were on their phones. And I was like, okay, I need to make this a clear expectation that phones are not allowed during this time. So to make it so that they couldn't just hide their phone in their pocket and sneakily look down under the table during the mindfulness practice, I told them that they had to put their phone face down on the corner of their table so I could see it and I could see that they didn't have it in their hands. Now, I knew that all of my students in the class had phones already because I literally saw all of them with phones in their hands. I don't know if I would have done this if I didn't know that all my students did have phones that they brought to school, because that could potentially create, awkwardness for someone that doesn't have a phone. So if you want to use this, up to your discretion of how you want to manage that. But that was just the reality in my class, and that worked for my class. So once I made that part of the expectations was that the phone went away, then really it was smooth sailing for the rest of the year. I have to say, I was amazed at how quickly my students jumped on board with this. I was expecting some pushback. I think that's what, as high school teachers, we're always kind of worried of students being like, this isn't cool, this is lame. We kind of have this feeling that we need to make things cool for them. And I was kind of worried that would be the case here, but it really wasn't. The students didn't seem to feel awkward at all, closing their eyes or just participating in the practice. There was no weirdness at all. So again, to go through the routine, they'd come in, I'd greet them, they'd sit down, I'd remind them of the expectations. So just get comfortable, remove all distractions, put your phone on the corner of your desk, and then I would say, okay, we're going to get started. And I would press play on the guided mindfulness audio. So I used the Edgecom classroom practice every day. Now, you might be thinking, but Kailey, you're the one that created the Edgecom classroom program. Why wouldn't you just guide them through it yourself, because you have the ability to do that? So I could have chosen to guide the mindfulness practice, but personally, I wanted to practice with them. I was stressed at the beginning of the year, and I wanted to use this time for my own self-care as well. I wanted to make sure that I was taking 5 minutes at the beginning of every class to center myself and make sure that I could be the best version of myself for my students. I was definitely battling lots of things going through my mind at the beginning of the year. It took me a little while to get my stride as I was starting in a new school again, or back to an old school, but lots had changed since I'd been there last. So there was lots of newness, lots of new things I had to learn. It was beginning of the COVID year, so lots going on. It was just a lot to manage. So it was important for me to be able to practice with them. And so that's what I chose to do. And that's what I did throughout the year. And it was great. It really supported me and really made me feel that I was able to be a better teacher for them for having taken the time to listen to the practice and follow it with them. So after we listened to the 5-minute guided mindfulness practice together, then after we would have a quick little morning meeting type of thing. So we would go around the class one by one, and I would ask them a question to answer, and they could choose to answer the question or just pass if they wanted. So at the beginning, I asked them to share what they noticed during the mindfulness practice. And in that first probably couple of weeks, I used that opportunity to kind of coach them. So when they would say something like, oh, I noticed that I was like really distracted today, my mind was going everywhere, then I would take that opportunity to just respond and say, yeah, that's really normal. When we're practicing mindfulness, the goal isn't to stop our thoughts. The goal is just to notice that we're having thoughts. Thanks for sharing. And then I'd go to the next person. And, sometimes students would just say, I have nothing to share. And I'd say, okay, thank you. And that was it. But this kind of became the chance for me to not only coach them through the practice and create some sort of discussion around the mindfulness practice, but it also gave me the chance to just talk to them a little bit one-on-one. I only got to see them in person every second day. So this really became a way for me to sort of get to know them and get to know their personalities a little bit. So I really appreciated taking that time to do that. So in the first couple months of this, because I was doing the routine this way, it took us about 10 minutes to do the mindfulness practice, the discussion. By the time I took attendance, that's 10 minutes into our class. Now, that seems like a lot of time from a 75-minute science period, but I'm telling you, once we were finished the mindfulness practice, those students were ready to go. Like, I pretty much just taught and we did activities, and it was like, go, go, go for the rest of the period, but they were engaged the whole time. And I gained that 10 minutes back for sure. So it was totally worth the time. And I didn't fall behind in my plans of what I wanted to get through this semester, having taken that time. If anything, I think that it probably helped both my students and myself to just be way more focused during our classes and get more accomplished during each class. So that was really great. Another question that I would sometimes ask them was just, how are you feeling today? Because it was a COVID year, there was lots going on, lots of emotion, different times, and I really wanted to just check in with them sometimes. So sometimes we would just have a fairly long discussion, and I would just say, how are you doing? Like, how are you feeling? What's going on? Be candid, share whatever you want to share. And that was super helpful for me too, to actually hear how they were doing and what was stressing them out. Because oftentimes it surprised me, like the things that they would say, I'd be like, oh, like I forgot, as an adult, we forget what it's like to be a teenager. And you're like, oh, that's how you're thinking. Okay. Here's how I can help you manage that, or here's how I can adjust the way that we're doing things. One thing that came up a lot, because this is a different year and students had to be a lot more independent in their learning, because 50% of the time they were learning independently from home. So I wasn't teaching them over like online while they were learning from home. It was up to them to work on the course they were supposed to work on the course for 75 minutes at the time that they would have been in class, but they're supposed to be working from home. So there's a lot of challenges. We're asking a lot of these grade, 10 or 11 students, like high school students. We're asking a lot of them to be motivated to do this work, to make sure that they're managing their time properly and they're getting what needs to get done. So a lot of things that actually came up throughout the year as we were having this discussion of just, how are you feeling? What's going on? What did you do this weekend? Things would come up that I'd be like, this is a life skill that I can teach you about. So one thing that came up a lot was students feeling overwhelmed and stressed about the amount of work that they had, and that they were really finding it challenging to like get their work done on time or be motivated to get their work done. So I ended up doing but like a couple times throughout the year, I would review it and go over it again. But I would actually walk them through the process of creating a work schedule for their week. So I would, get them to take out their agendas, and then we would list all the things that they had to do that week. And then they would put each item that had to get done on a specific time slot during the week so that they knew exactly what they're supposed to be working on when. And I would get them to schedule in personal time. So, okay, when is your Netflix time? When is your video game time? Okay, that is precious time on your schedule. That isn't time that you should be feeling guilty that you aren't doing your homework. So you don't do homework during that block. Instead, you do homework during the other block that you blocked for homework time. So that's when you're going to work on that. And so I taught a couple different variations of scheduling strategies and planning and making study schedules and stuff like that. I did that a couple times throughout the year, and it was always unexpected. I didn't expect to spend a big chunk of my class teaching that instead of the science curriculum, but it was necessary. And when I took the time to do that, I saw that they were more successful in handing their work in on time after that. And that was better for me because I had less students that I had to chase down for getting homework in because they actually got it in on time. So I wouldn't have known that that was something they were struggling with, and that was a skill that they needed to be specifically taught, had I not taken the time to just check in with them every day and ask how they were doing, how they were feeling. So in the end, it became a win, and I feel that I was able to teach them skills that are going to be useful for their lives and also useful just to how education is changing now. Students have to be a lot more independent, and so they need to be specifically taught the skills to be independent. So that was important. Now, a way that I changed kind of my routine throughout the year, and this is something that high school teachers will understand, is that the reality when you're teaching in high school is that students arrive to class late. No matter how much they enjoy your class, they're high school students and they're learning to manage their time. So in one of my classes, I have two kids that no matter what, pretty much always arrived about 3 to 5 minutes late. And we had talks about it, but that was just my reality. They would arrive a little bit late. So I started to change my structure a little bit. So instead of them coming in, us starting the mindfulness practice right away, which then caused, since we were starting the mindfulness practice right away, then those kids that were coming in like 2 to 5 minutes late would be walking in the middle of the mindfulness practice. And so they'd be distracting to the rest of us that were trying to do the practice. So just to avoid that, I just flipped the script. So instead of doing the mindfulness practice right away, I would take attendance and chit chat with them, ask how they're doing today, what's going on, how you're feeling, those kind of questions. I would do that first. And then once everyone arrived 5 minutes in, then I would do the guided mindfulness practice, and then we'd jump right into our lesson. So if that's something that you struggle with too, then that could also be a solution for you, is to just start the mindfulness practice a couple minutes later. So that was the structure. That's how I taught mindfulness throughout the year. I took feedback from my students a couple different times just because I wanted to know, what are you thinking of doing this mindfulness practice every day? Is it worth it? Is it important? So one day that really stands out to me where I asked this was that afternoon, I was going to be giving a presentation to a school about teaching mindfulness in the classroom. And the administrator that hired me to come in and give this professional development workshop, or not come in, but do it online, because that's how everything is done these days. But they had told me ahead of time that they knew there was a few teachers, specifically high school teachers on staff, that were reluctant to teaching mindfulness in the classroom or social emotional learning in the classroom because they felt that they didn't have enough time or that wasn't a priority. So I knew that when I was going to be teaching that workshop, that was something I wanted to address in the workshop. So I told my students that. I said, I'm going to be doing this workshop this afternoon. So I asked them to tell me what they thought of mindfulness in a high school classroom. Like, did they care about it? Was it helpful? If it was helpful, why? And what I should explain to these teachers that might be reluctant to practicing mindfulness in the classroom. And I was pretty amazed. Like, I knew that my students didn't hate the practice because they were always willing to do the practice. They always participated in our daily Edgecom practices, like no problems at all. I didn't have any problems with behaviors or anything like that during the practice. So I knew they didn't hate it, but I hadn't at that point really asked them in lots of detail what they liked about it. And it was pretty great because they went into a lot of detail about how helpful they found this practice. And the group that I have is pretty quiet. They aren't very opinionated. They don't really like to share a ton. But on this day, when I asked them this question, they went on and on. So that was a good sign to me. They told me things like that they experience a lot of stress and they in the past didn't know how to handle that stress. But now that we are doing the mindfulness Edgecom classroom practices every day, that they now have a bunch of strategies that they use in their personal lives to manage their feelings of stress and overwhelm and anxiety. So that was great to hear that they were gaining these specific strategies that they're actually using and felt helpful for them. A lot of them express the fact that when they arrive at school, they don't feel ready for learning. So when they arrive, they're feeling kind of like they had been rushed that morning, or they're really tired, or they just don't feel that their brain is ready to get into school right away. And so this just 5 minutes of mindfulness and time to just chat a little bit really helped them prepare their brain for learning. And they felt that after having done the mindfulness practice, they were way more ready to learn. And I observed that as well. So it was really cool to hear that coming from them. Like, I was very impressed with how much material I could actually get through in a class with them being engaged the whole time, for like a long period of time after doing this mindfulness practice. That being said, I had never not done the mindfulness practice with this group. So I wasn't necessarily sure if this group was just really able to focus for long periods of time, or if the mindfulness practice was actually helping them. So it was nice to hear from their own mouths that the mindfulness practice was helping them to focus and helping them to feel ready for learning. So yeah, those were kind of the main things, was that they are gaining strategies that help them, and that after having done the mindfulness practice at the beginning of the class, they just feel like their brain and body is ready for learning. So that was good to know. Now, yeah, that's really it. A couple things that I learned throughout this semester that I'm going to kind of play with changing next semester, was that this semester, with the Edgecom classroom program, if you're familiar with the program, it is divided into different themes. And so what we suggest is that you stick with one theme for a month and you listen to the audios in that theme for a month, and then you move to the next one. Now, this year, because I created the program so I know it well, I kind of jumped around a lot. So when I would notice that my students were feeling a certain way, they were mentioning certain emotions, I'd be like, I know which practice we should do. And so then I would choose the audio that I felt was the right fit for that day. Now, I think that really worked well, and there was nothing wrong with doing it that way, kind of jumping between themes. But I want to experiment next semester with being a little more specific with doing one theme at a time, so that they're learning sort of the same thing and really mastering those skills before I move on to the next unit in the next theme. So that's just something that I'm going to experiment next semester to see which way I prefer. And then, because I only see my students every other day, we couldn't get through that many of the units in Edgecom Classroom. So I was like kind of sad that we didn't get to do a few of the units that I would have liked to do with them, but we just ran out of time. So I will be excited for when the time comes when I actually have my students every day for the whole semester, and that will be able to get through more of the Edgecom Classroom content together. So those are my thoughts moving forward. Another thing that I wanted to mention, so I did for 2 weeks this year, we had 2 weeks where we were doing complete remote learning. So where my students were at home and I was teaching them remotely over Microsoft Teams. So during those 2 weeks, we continued the mindfulness practice and we just did it during our Teams meeting. So I would start our Teams meeting by playing the Edgecom classroom audio, and then we would get started with the lesson. So I really didn't change the routine at all. It stayed the same, and the students really appreciated that. And they also told me that they wanted to keep doing the mindfulness practices while we were doing learning from home. And another thing that I did a lot when we were doing the remote learning 2 weeks is I would do mindful movement. So that's, we have mindful movement videos in the Edgecom classroom program. I didn't show the videos. I instead just guided them myself through some mindful movement. I would do that kind of halfway through the lesson to just get us moving a little bit and just get the energy up. But that is how I managed that. So I hope that this was useful for you. If you don't use the Edgecom classroom program, that is totally fine. You can still follow the kind of routine and structure that I had by using whatever resource that you like to use or by teaching it yourself. That is totally possible. If you're interested in using the Edgecom classroom program in your high school class, this program is created for K to 12. So we've created the audios and the content so that it's simple enough for kindergartners to understand, but it's never babyish. It's just simple language because we want the teachers and the high school students to also be able to learn and grow and be able to practice together. So that's one unique aspect of the Edgecom classroom program, is that it's created for all ages so that teachers can practice with their students. So if you're interested in checking out the Edgecom classroom program, go to edgecom.com and you'll see all the information about how the program works. Now, you can start using the first unit of the Edgecom classroom program for free by signing up for our free trial. So you'll see when you go to edgecom.com, you can either sign up or start the free trial. When you get the free trial, you'll get training on how to use the program. You will get access to the first unit of the Edgecom classroom program. So you're going to get 10 audios that you can use with your students, plus printables that will be helpful for you as well. And that free trial never expires. So you'll be able to keep using that for as long as you want, forever and ever. If you want access to more audios and you want to be able to use the whole library of Edgecom classroom units and themes, then you can sign up for a membership, which is a 12-month subscription, which gives you access to everything within the program. All right. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. Your exit ticket today is to consider how you might practice mindfulness or social emotional learning, both in your classroom if you teach in high school, or how you could apply what I've taught today to whatever classroom or whatever situation you are teaching in these days. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you so much, and we are so happy that you're part of this awesome community of educators. If you got value from this episode, please share it with a friend or colleague that you think would like it too and be able to get some value from it as well. Have a wonderful week.